The autumn of 1842 arrived in London with its characteristic grey skies and persistent drizzle, but the ballroom of Ashford House blazed with enough candlelight to banish any thought of the weather outside. Lady Vivian Sinclair stood near the marble pillar at the edge of the dance floor, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls that framed her face, her chestnut eyes surveying the crowd with barely concealed frustration. 3 years. 3 interminable years of subtle hints, carefully timed encounters, and what she considered rather obvious demonstrations of interest, all utterly wasted on the most infuriating man in England. William Hawthorne, Duke of Meridale, stood across the ballroom, his tall frame commanding attention even in a room full of nobility. His black hair was perfectly styled, his cravat tied with mathematical precision, and those devastating brown eyes currently focused on Lady Charlotte Pemberton, who giggled behind her fan at whatever charming nonsense he was undoubtedly spouting. "He is insufferable," Vivian muttered to her closest friend, Miss Eleanor Winters, who had materialized at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "The Duke?" Eleanor asked innocently, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Whatever has he done now?" "Exactly nothing, which is precisely the problem." Vivian accepted the champagne and took a rather unladylike gulp. "Look at him, Eleanor, flirting with Charlotte Pemberton as though she hung the moon, when just last week he was composing poetry to Miss Thornbury's eyes." "Dreadful poetry from what I heard," Eleanor offered consolingly. "That is not the point." Vivian's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, lowering it to a fierce whisper. "The point is that William Hawthorne flirts with every woman in London except—" She stopped abruptly. "Except you," Eleanor finished gently. Vivian pressed her lips together. It was not entirely true. The Duke did flirt with her, but in the same casual, meaningless way he flirted with everyone else. There was no weight to it, no genuine interest. She was simply another name on his extensive list of charming diversions. "I have made my interest abundantly clear," Vivian said, her frustration bleeding into her words. "Last month at the Hartley Musicale, I practically quoted his own words back to him about Byron's poetry. At Lady Ashford's garden party, I arranged to be near the rose arbor at precisely the time he takes his constitutional. I have smiled, I have laughed at his jests, I have—" "You have done everything short of proposing to him yourself," Eleanor interrupted, not unkindly. "My dear Vivian, perhaps it is time to accept that the Duke of Meridale is simply not the marrying kind. He is 32 years old. He must marry eventually, if only to produce an heir. Yes, but eventually could be 10 years from now, and you cannot spend the next decade mooning after a man who treats you no differently than he treats Lady Pemberton or Miss Thornbury or any of the other dozen women he's charmed this season alone." Vivian knew Eleanor was right, which only made it more aggravating. She watched as William threw back his head and laughed at something Lady Pemberton said, his whole face transforming with genuine amusement. Her heart gave that familiar, painful squeeze it always did when she looked at him. Goodness gracious, she was pathetic. "What I need," Vivian said slowly, an idea beginning to form, "is to make him realize what he is missing." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Oh no, I know that expression. What are you planning?" Before Vivian could answer, a smooth voice interrupted them. "Lady Vivian, Miss Winters, how delightful to see you both looking so lovely this evening." Lord Nathaniel Ashcombe, eldest son of the Marquis of Denshire, swept into an elegant bow. With his golden hair, striking blue eyes and fashionable attire, Nathaniel was considered one of the most handsome gentlemen in society. Though everyone agreed his vanity rather diminished his appeal. Still, he was charming enough, wealthy enough, and well-connected enough to be invited everywhere. "Lord Ashcombe," Vivian said, offering her hand. An idea struck her with such clarity that she nearly gasped. "How wonderful to see you." Eleanor shot her a warning look, but Vivian ignored it. "I was wondering," Nathaniel continued, his practiced smile never wavering, "if you might honor me with the next dance?" This was it, her opportunity. Vivian glanced across the ballroom to where William stood, still entertaining Lady Pemberton. He had not looked her way once all evening. Very well. If he would not notice her on her own, perhaps he would notice her on another man's arm. "I would be delighted," Vivian said, placing her hand on Nathaniel's offered arm. As they moved toward the dance floor, she caught Eleanor's expression, half concerned, half fascinated. Her friend knew her too well. The quadrille was lively, requiring them to separate and rejoin several times. During one such moment, as Vivian turned gracefully through the steps, her eyes found William across the room. For just a heartbeat, she thought she saw him watching her, his expression unreadable. But then Lady Pemberton said something that reclaimed his attention, and the moment passed. "You dance beautifully, Lady Vivian," Nathaniel said, as they came together again. "As lovely as your movements are the roses in spring." Vivian barely suppressed a laugh. "You are too kind, Lord Ashcombe." "Not kind enough, surely. I wonder, my mother is hosting a small dinner party this Friday evening at Ashcombe House. Would you do me the great honor of allowing me to escort you?" Vivian's mind raced. A dinner party, a public appearance as Nathaniel's companion. Precisely the sort of thing that would be noticed by everyone in society, including a certain duke. "I should be delighted," she heard herself say, "though of course I shall need to bring my chaperone, Mrs. Davies." "Naturally. Shall I call for you at 7 o'clock? "Perfect." As the dance concluded and Nathaniel escorted her back to Eleanor, Vivian felt a strange mixture of triumph and trepidation. She had set her plan in motion. Now she could only hope it would have the desired effect. "Have you lost your senses?" Eleanor hissed the moment Nathaniel departed. "Nathaniel Ashcombe? Everyone knows he is the vainest man in England." "Precisely," Vivian said, watching as William finally glanced in her direction. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and she lifted her chin slightly, offering him a cool, polite smile, before deliberately turning away. "Sometimes, Eleanor, one must fight fire with fire." "I think you mean vanity with vanity." "That, too." What Vivian did not see, as she turned away, was the way William Hawthorne's expression shifted. The easy charm vanished, replaced by something harder, more focused. He excused himself from Lady Pemberton with such abruptness that the poor woman stood blinking in confusion, and his eyes tracked Vivian's golden head through the crowd with an intensity that would have startled her. He had noticed. Oh yes, he had most definitely noticed. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth, and Vivian spent far longer than necessary preparing for the dinner at Ashcombe House. Her lady's maid, Marie, arranged her hair in an elegant chignon, with several artful curls framing her face, and helped her into a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the amber flecks in her chestnut eyes. "You look beautiful, my lady," Mrs. Davies said warmly, as Vivian descended the stairs of Everleigh House. The elderly widow had served as Vivian's chaperone since her come-out 5 years ago, and despite her proper demeanour, she possessed a knowing twinkle in her eye. "Lord Ashcombe is a very fortunate young man." "It is only a dinner, Mrs. Davies," Vivian said, though her heart was beating rather faster than usual. Her father, the Earl of Everleigh, looked up from his newspaper in the drawing-room. "Ashcombe, eh? Son of Denshire. Good family. Bit of a peacock from what I hear, but good family." "Papa!" Vivian protested, though she could not help laughing. "Just stating facts, my dear. Have a pleasant evening." The carriage ride to Ashcombe House was mercifully brief. Nathaniel greeted them at the entrance with his characteristic flourish, complimenting Vivian's appearance so effusively that Mrs. Davies raised an eyebrow. "You are too generous, Lord Ashcombe," Vivian said, taking his arm as they entered the house. The dinner party proved to be larger than Nathaniel had suggested. At least 30 guests filled the elegant dining room. Vivian's heart skipped when she spotted several familiar faces, including Eleanor, who caught her eye with a look that clearly said, "I hope you know what you are doing." But it was the tall figure near the windows that made Vivian's breath catch. William Hawthorne stood in conversation with Lord Winters and another gentleman, a glass of wine in his hand. He wore evening attire of impeccable cut, his black coat moulded perfectly to his broad shoulders, his cravat arranged in the intricate mathematical style he favoured. He looked, Vivian thought with some irritation, absolutely magnificent. And then he turned, and his eyes found hers across the room. The effect was immediate and electric. His gaze swept from her face to where her hand rested on Nathaniel's arm, and something dangerous flashed in those brown eyes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and the glass in his hand stilled halfway to his lips. Nathaniel, oblivious to the undercurrents, guided Vivian further into the room, introducing her to various guests with elaborate courtesy. But Vivian was acutely aware of William's presence, of the way his attention kept returning to her, even as he maintained his conversation with Lord Winters. "Lady Vivian," a smooth voice said, and she turned to find William standing before her, having materialized with the predatory grace of a wolf. "How unexpected to see you here." "Your Grace," she replied, pleased that her voice remained steady. "I might say the same of you. I was not aware you were acquainted with the Ashcombe family." "My connections are extensive," he said, his tone pleasant, but his eyes cool. They flicked to Nathaniel, who had stepped slightly closer to Vivian in an unmistakably possessive gesture. "Ashcombe, Your Grace," Nathaniel responded with a bow that was precisely as deep as protocol required, and not an inch more. "How good of you to grace our humble gathering." Vivian nearly laughed at the absurdity of calling Ashcombe House, a magnificent mansion in Mayfair, humble, but she maintained her composure. William's attention returned to her, and she felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. "I was not aware that you and Lord Ashcombe were acquainted." The pause before acquainted was deliberate and loaded with meaning. "We danced at the Ashford ball," Vivian said lightly. "Lord Ashcombe was kind enough to invite me to this evening's dinner." How thoughtful of him. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. Nathaniel, to his credit, held his ground, though Vivian noticed his smile had become somewhat fixed. "Since when," William continued, his voice deceptively casual, "have you had a suitor, Lady Vivian?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Vivian's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, even as triumph sang through her veins. It was working. By all the heavens, it was actually working. "Since I decided to accept the attentions of a gentleman who actually demonstrates interest," she replied, her tone sweet as honey, but her meaning unmistakable. Something flared in William's eyes, jealousy, pure and undisguised. His hand tightened around his wine-glass so forcefully that Vivian half expected the crystal to shatter. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken words and suppressed emotion. Then William's mouth curved into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "How delightful for you both," he said. The words clipped. "I hope you enjoy your evening, Lady Vivian Ashcombe." He turned and walked away with such barely controlled fury that several guests glanced after him in surprise. Vivian watched him go, her own emotions in turmoil. Triumph, certainly. She had achieved exactly the reaction she wanted, but also something else, something that felt uncomfortably like guilt and confusion. "Goodness," Nathaniel murmured beside her. "I have never seen Meridale quite so intense. You must have made quite an impression on him, Lady Vivian." If only Nathaniel knew the half of it. Throughout dinner, Vivian was acutely aware of William's presence several seats away. He maintained his usual charming facade, entertaining his dinner companions with witty observations and amusing anecdotes. But every time Vivian glanced in his direction, she found his eyes already on her, dark and brooding and filled with something that made her pulse race. When Nathaniel laughed at something she said, William's fork clattered against his plate. When Nathaniel refilled her wineglass with solicitous attention, William's jaw clenched visibly. And when Nathaniel leaned in to whisper some comment about the lady across from them, William pushed back from the table so abruptly that conversation momentarily ceased. "Forgive me," he said smoothly, his composure restored. "I seem to have developed a headache. Please excuse me." He departed with impeccable courtesy, but Vivian saw the rigid set of his shoulders, the too quick stride that spoke of barely leashed emotion. Eleanor caught her eye from across the table, her expression concerned. Vivian offered a small reassuring smile, though her own feelings were far from settled. She had wanted to provoke a reaction from William. She had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. So why did she feel so unsettled by his jealousy? And what, precisely, was she going to do about it now? The following 3 weeks proved to be the most entertaining and exhausting period of Vivian's life. True to his word, Nathaniel Ashcombe pursued his courtship with enthusiastic dedication. Flowers arrived at Everleigh House daily, each bouquet more elaborate than the last. He escorted her to the theatre, to afternoon teas, to musicales and garden parties. He composed sonnets to her beauty, dreadful sonnets, Eleanor privately informed her after hearing one recited at Lady Hartley's soirée, and made no secret of his admiration. And everywhere they appeared, William Hawthorne seemed to materialize like a conjured spirit. At Lady Pemberton's garden party, Vivian was strolling through the rose garden with Nathaniel and Mrs. Davies, when William emerged from behind a particularly large topiary, startling them all. "Lady Vivian," he said with an expression of theatrical surprise that fooled absolutely no one. "What an unexpected pleasure. I was just examining the roses." "In October?" Vivian asked, one eyebrow raised. "How fascinating." "I have a keen interest in horticulture," William replied with impressive dignity, despite the fact that everyone present knew he could barely tell a rose from a turnip. Nathaniel's smile grew tight. "Your Grace, are you perhaps lost? The gentleman's smoking room is in quite the opposite direction." "Not lost at all. Simply taking the air." "The air seems particularly thick today," Nathaniel observed. William's eyes flashed dangerously, but before he could respond, Vivian smoothly intervened. "Gentlemen, perhaps we might all enjoy the air together. The weather is lovely." What followed was possibly the most awkward 15 minutes of Vivian's life, with Nathaniel on one side determinedly pointing out various flowers and commenting on their beauty, while clearly knowing nothing about them, and William on the other, making increasingly absurd observations about soil composition and pruning techniques, equally ignorant but far more creative in his fabrications. Mrs. Davies trailed behind them, her expression hovering between amusement and despair. "The Duke seems very interested in gardening," Nathaniel said, after William finally departed to inspect the hedges elsewhere. "Strange, considering Lord Winters mentioned just last week that Merridale once mistook an herb garden for decorative shrubbery and had his gardener plant roses in it." Vivian bit her lip to keep from laughing. The pattern repeated itself with increasing frequency. At the theatre, William appeared in the box adjacent to theirs, having apparently purchased the tickets that very afternoon. During a promenade in Hyde Park, he, coincidentally, happened to be riding past at the exact moment Vivian and Nathaniel stopped to admire the Serpentine. At Lady Thornbury's musicale, he arrived late and took the only available seat, directly behind Vivian, spending the entire performance leaning forward to offer whispered commentary that made concentration impossible. "He is stalking you," Eleanor observed one afternoon as they took tea at Everley House. "I have never seen anything like it. The Duke of Merridale, one of the most sought-after bachelors in England, has become a lovesick puppy." "He is not lovesick," Vivian protested, though her heart fluttered at the suggestion. "He is possessive. There is a difference, my dear." He glares at Lord Ashcombe as though the poor man has committed treason. "Last night at the Hartley ball I thought he might actually challenge him to a duel when Nathaniel led you into the waltz." Vivian remembered that waltz. She had felt William's gaze burning into her back throughout the entire dance, so intense that she had nearly missed a step. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked helplessly. "I wanted his attention, and now I have it, but he has not actually done anything. He simply appears everywhere, looking absolutely murderous whenever Nathaniel comes near me." "Perhaps," Eleanor suggested gently, "you should speak with him. Tell him how you feel." "Absolutely not." Vivian set down her teacup with more force than necessary. "Eleanor, I have spent 3 years making my interest clear. If William Hawthorne wants me, he can do the pursuing for once. I am not going to simply hand him victory after he has ignored me for so long." Eleanor sighed. "You are both impossibly stubborn. Yes, well, I learned from the best." In truth, Vivian found the situation more confusing with each passing day. She had wanted to make William jealous, to force him to realize he might lose her to another man. That part had succeeded spectacularly, but she had not anticipated the intensity of his reaction, nor the way her own feelings would become tangled in the web she had woven. Because despite his constant presence and obvious jealousy, William had not actually declared himself. He appeared at every event, monopolized her attention whenever possible, and made his displeasure with Nathaniel abundantly clear. But he had not taken the final step of actual courtship. It was maddening. And then there was Nathaniel himself. For all his vanity and theatrical declarations, he was not unkind. He treated her with courtesy and respect, and if his compliments were excessive and his poetry atrocious, he at least seemed genuinely interested in her company, which made her feel guilty about using him as a pawn in her game with William. The situation reached its crisis point on a Tuesday afternoon at Lady Ashford's autumn tea party. Vivian had arrived with Mrs. Davies and been immediately claimed by Nathaniel, who guided her to a settee near the windows. The drawing room was filled with the cream of London society, all engaged in the delicate dance of gossip and social maneuvering. William arrived 20 minutes later, his eyes immediately finding Vivian across the crowded room. He crossed toward them with the determined stride of a man on a mission, but was intercepted by Lady Charlotte Pemberton, who had apparently not received the message that the Duke's attentions had shifted elsewhere. "Your Grace," Charlotte said brightly, positioning herself directly in his path. "How delightful to see you. I was just telling Mamma about the lovely poetry you composed last month. Do you remember? About my eyes being like sapphires?" Vivian could not hear William's response from across the room, but she saw his jaw tighten with frustration as Charlotte chattered on, oblivious to his distraction. "Lady Vivian," Nathaniel said, drawing her attention back, "there is something I wish to discuss with you." His tone was unusually serious, and Vivian felt a flutter of apprehension. "Yes, Lord Ashcombe? I have greatly enjoyed these past weeks in your company," he began, and Vivian's stomach sank. This sounded like the beginning of something formal. "You are the most captivating woman I have ever met, and I find myself—" "Lord Ashcombe," Vivian interrupted quickly, "perhaps this conversation would be better had in a more private setting." "Oh, I do not mind who hears," Nathaniel said with a smile. "Let everyone know that I am the most fortunate gentleman in London." "Nathaniel, please!" But he was already reaching for her hand. "Lady Vivian Sinclair, would you do me the tremendous honor—" "No." The word burst from Vivian louder than she intended, causing several nearby conversations to halt. Nathaniel froze, his hand still outstretched, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion. "I beg your pardon," he said slowly. Vivian felt heat flood her cheeks. "Forgive me, Lord Ashcombe, but I cannot accept what you were about to offer. But I thought, we have been courting for weeks. I know, and I apologize if I gave you false hope, but—" She trailed off, unable to find words that would not wound him further. Nathaniel withdrew his hand, his handsome face settling into lines of hurt pride. "I see. May I ask if there is someone else?" Vivian's eyes involuntarily flicked across the room to where William stood, now staring at them with an expression of intense focus, having apparently abandoned Lady Charlotte mid-sentence. Nathaniel followed her gaze and his mouth thinned. "Ah, the Duke, I should have realized." "Nathaniel, I am truly sorry. No need to apologize, Lady Vivian," he said stiffly, rising to his feet. "You have made your feelings perfectly clear. If you will excuse me." He departed with as much dignity as he could muster, leaving Vivian sitting alone with a room full of curious eyes upon her. Mrs. Davies materialized at her elbow, offering silent support. Eleanor rushed over the moment Nathaniel disappeared. "What happened?" "I believe," Vivian said faintly, "I just ended a courtship that I am not entirely certain actually existed." "By thunder," Eleanor breathed. "Look at the Duke." Vivian looked. William was crossing the room toward her with single-minded intensity, his expression a mixture of hope and determination that made her heart race. But before he could reach her, Lady Ashford announced that tea would be served in the garden, and the crowd shifted, creating an impenetrable barrier between them. Vivian caught a glimpse of William's frustrated expression before she was swept up in the general movement toward the doors. By the time she reached the garden and extracted herself from a conversation with Lady Thornbury about embroidery patterns, William had vanished entirely. "He left," Eleanor reported, returning from a reconnaissance mission. "Lord Winters said he claimed a pressing engagement." Vivian felt an absurd urge to cry. "I do not understand him. He has been haunting my every step for weeks, glaring at Nathaniel as though plotting his demise, and now, when Nathaniel is finally out of the picture, he simply leaves." "Perhaps," Eleanor suggested carefully, "he does not know that Nathaniel is out of the picture. You did have your confrontation rather publicly, but that does not mean the Duke heard what was said." Vivian considered this. It was possible. William had been across the room, and the background chatter would have obscured their actual words. For all he knew, she might have accepted Nathaniel's proposal. "What do I do?" she asked helplessly. Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You wait, and you trust that if his feelings are genuine, he will find a way to make them known." But 3 days passed with no word from William. No flowers arrived at Everley House. No coincidental encounters occurred at social events. It was as though he had simply vanished from her life. Vivian told herself she was not disappointed. She had played her game and achieved her goal of making him jealous. If he chose not to act on those feelings, that was his decision to make. But in the quiet moments, usually late at night when sleep eluded her, she admitted to herself that she was desperately, hopelessly in love with William Hawthorne, and she had no idea what to do about it. The answer came on Friday afternoon, in the most unexpected way possible. Vivian was in the library at Everley House attempting to lose herself in a novel when Marie rushed in with wide eyes. "My lady, Lord Ashcombe is here, and he insists on speaking with you. He says it is urgent." Vivian's brow furrowed. "Did he seem angry?" "No, my lady, quite the opposite, actually. He seemed almost nervous." Curiosity overcame her reluctance. "Very well. Show him to the drawing room, and please ask Mrs. Davies to join us." 5 minutes later, Vivian entered the drawing room to find Nathaniel pacing before the fireplace, his usually immaculate appearance slightly dishevelled. Mrs. Davies had already settled into her usual chair near the window, her embroidery in hand. "Lord Ashcombe," Vivian said, her voice carefully neutral, "this is unexpected." Nathaniel turned, and to her surprise, his expression held genuine distress. "Lady Vivian, I owe you an enormous apology." "Whatever for?" "For my behaviour these past weeks, for pursuing a courtship that I now realise was not entirely genuine on my part." Vivian sank onto the settee, thoroughly confused. "I do not understand." Nathaniel took a deep breath, as though steeling himself. "The truth is, Lady Vivian, I have been courting you under false pretenses, not because I did not enjoy your company, you are truly delightful, but because—" He paused, colour rising in his cheeks. "Because I am in love with someone else." Of all the things Vivian had expected to hear, this was not among them. "I beg your pardon?" "Your companion, Miss Hartwell, your lady's maid sister, who sometimes attends social functions in your household. I met her at Lady Pemberton's musical last month, and I have not been able to stop thinking about her since." Vivian's mind reeled. Grace Hartwell was indeed employed in her household, serving as a sort of auxiliary companion when Mrs. Davies needed assistance. She was a pretty, sensible young woman, of respectable but modest family, exactly the sort of match that would scandalize Nathaniel's aristocratic family. "Does Miss Hartwell return your regard?" Vivian asked carefully. Nathaniel's expression transformed, becoming almost boyish. "I believe so. We have had occasion to speak several times when I called at Everley House, and yesterday in the garden while I was waiting for you to receive me, we—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "You kissed her," Vivian supplied, pieces falling into place. "Yes, and she did not slap me, which I took as an encouraging sign." He ran a hand through his hair, further dishevelling it. "Lady Vivian, I am ashamed to admit that I began courting you partly because Grace was often present at the events you attended. It gave me opportunities to see her that I would not otherwise have had." Vivian should have been insulted. Instead, she found herself fighting the urge to laugh. "Lord Ashcombe, are you telling me that for the past 3 weeks, while I have been using you to make the Duke of Merridale jealous, you have been using me to court my household companion?" Nathaniel blinked. "So you were using me to make Merridale jealous?" "Spectacularly successfully, I might add." A startled laugh burst from Nathaniel. "Heavens, we are a pair of absolute scoundrels." "Indeed." Vivian felt an enormous weight lift from her shoulders. "So what will you do about Miss Hartwell?" "I intend to speak with her father and request permission to court her properly. My own father will be appalled. He has plans for me to marry the daughter of a viscount, but I find I no longer care. Grace is worth any scandal." "How romantic," Mrs. Davies murmured from her corner, not looking up from her embroidery. Vivian smiled. "Then I wish you every happiness, Lord Ashcombe, and I apologize for involving you, however inadvertently, in my own schemes." "No apology necessary. In fact, I am grateful. My pursuit of you provided the perfect excuse to frequent Everley House." He paused. "Though I must say, Lady Vivian, if the Duke cannot see what an extraordinary woman you are, he is a greater fool than I took him for." After Nathaniel departed, considerably more cheerfully than he had arrived, Vivian remained in the drawing-room, her thoughts churning. "Mrs. Davies," she said slowly, "am I a terrible person for using Lord Ashcombe the way I did?" The elderly widow set down her embroidery and fixed Vivian with a knowing look. "My dear child, the heart wants what it wants, and sometimes we take foolish paths in pursuit of it, But I think perhaps it is time to stop with schemes and games and simply tell the Duke how you feel. But what if he does not? Then at least you will know, Mrs. Davies interrupted gently, and you can move forward with your life one way or another. This uncertainty is eating you alive. Vivian knew she was right, but the thought of confessing her feelings to William, of making herself that vulnerable, terrified her more than any society scandal ever could. Still, perhaps it was time to be brave. She was still debating the matter the following afternoon when fate, or a meddlesome friend, intervened. Eleanor appeared at Everleigh House in a state of high excitement. "You must come with me immediately. There is something you need to see." "What are you talking about?" "No questions. Just trust me. Bring Mrs. Davies and come to Hyde Park, the Serpentine path near the bridge." 20 minutes later, Vivian found herself standing on the aforementioned path, thoroughly confused. "Eleanor, what?" "Shh!" Eleanor pointed. Following her friend's gesture, Vivian looked down the path and froze. William Hawthorne stood some 50 yards away, apparently in earnest conversation with no one. He paced back and forth, gesturing to the empty air, his mouth moving in what appeared to be impassioned speech. "Has he lost his senses?" Vivian whispered. "I believe," Eleanor said, barely suppressing her grin, "that he is rehearsing." As they watched, William ran a hand through his black hair, disrupting its usual perfect arrangement, and appeared to start his speech over. Even from this distance, Vivian could see the tension in his shoulders, the nervous energy in his movements. "Rehearsing what?" she asked, though her heart had begun to beat faster. "If I had to guess, a declaration of affection for a certain lady with blonde hair and chestnut eyes." Vivian's breath caught. "You cannot possibly know that." "Oh, can I not? Lord Winters told me that the Duke has been impossible all week, distracted, irritable, and constantly muttering about missed opportunities and that damned Ashcombe. And then this morning Winters saw him leave his house with what appeared to be a bouquet of flowers, your favourite flowers, I might add, though how he knows that is anyone's guess, and followed him here. Lord Winters is spying on him. Lord Winters is a romantic, and he is tired of watching his friend moon over you like a lovesick poet, as are we all, frankly." Before Vivian could respond, William turned in their direction. His eyes widened with shock as he spotted them, then narrowed with something that might have been embarrassment or frustration or both. He closed the distance between them with long strides, and Vivian noticed he indeed carried a bouquet of her favourite autumn chrysanthemums, cream and golden rust. "Lady Vivian," he said, his voice slightly strained. "Miss Winters, Mrs. Davies, what a surprise." "Your Grace," Vivian managed, her heart hammering. "We were just taking the air." "Were you?" It was not a question. His eyes met hers, and she saw a vulnerability there that she had never seen before. "How long have you been standing there?" "Not long," Eleanor lied cheerfully. "We were just leaving, actually. Come along, Mrs. Davies. I believe we saw Lady Ashford near the East Lawn." "We did no such—" "Oh!" Mrs. Davies caught on, offering Eleanor her arm. "Indeed we did. Lady Vivian, we shall be just over there. Within sight, of course." And just like that, Vivian and William were alone on the path. Well, as alone as one could be in Hyde Park on a sunny afternoon, with dozens of other people strolling about and 2 determined chaperones watching from a calculated distance. William cleared his throat. "I suppose subterfuge is pointless at this juncture." "I suppose so," Vivian agreed, fighting to keep her voice steady. He held out the bouquet, and she noticed his hand trembled slightly. "These are for you. I remembered that you mentioned at Lady Ashford's garden party last spring that autumn chrysanthemums were your favourite." Vivian took the flowers, amazed that he had remembered such a small detail. "They are beautiful. Thank you." "Lady Vivian, He stopped, took a breath and started again. "These past weeks have been among the most torturous of my life." "Torturous?" "Watching you with Ashcombe, knowing I had no right to object, no claim to make, realizing that my own foolish blindness might have cost me—" He trailed off, his jaw working. "Cost you what?" Vivian asked softly. William's brown eyes met hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Everything that matters." The world seemed to narrow to just the 2 of them, despite the public setting. Vivian clutched the chrysanthemums, their autumn scent filling her senses. "I need you to understand something," William continued, his words coming faster now as though he feared if he stopped he might lose his courage. I have known you for 3 years. 3 years of watching you at balls and parties and dinners. 3 years of conversations that were supposedly casual, but that I replayed in my mind for days afterward. 3 years of telling myself that you were just another lovely woman in a city full of lovely women. And, Vivian prompted when he paused, and I was lying to myself. The admission seemed to cost him something. Because you were never just another anything, Vivian. You are, the woman I thought about first thing every morning and last thing every night. The one whose opinion I valued above all others. The one who made me laugh genuinely, not just politely. The one I searched for in every ballroom I entered. Vivian's eyes were stinging with unexpected tears. Then why did you never say anything? Why did you flirt with every other woman in London but treat me as though I were merely another acquaintance? Because I was terrified, William said simply. My parents' marriage was a disaster. Loveless, bitter, filled with resentment. I swore I would never let myself become vulnerable that way. Never give anyone that kind of power over me. So I kept everyone at arm's length, including you. Especially you, because you were the one who could have truly hurt me. William, let me finish, please, before I lose my nerve entirely. He took a step closer and she could see the emotion raw in his face. When I saw you with Ashcombe, when I thought I might have lost you to him, Vivian, it was like a blade to the heart. I realized that I had already given you that power, whether I acknowledged it or not. And that I was a complete fool for wasting 3 years when I could have been courting you properly. You thought I was going to marry him, Vivian said, understanding dawning. At Lady Ashford's tea party, you saw us talking and thought that you had accepted his proposal, yes, and I could not bear to watch it, so I left like a coward. He gave a self-deprecating laugh. Lord Winters called me 16 different kinds of idiot and told me to get my head out of my... Well, he used rather colourful language. The point is, I returned to Lady Ashford's house that evening, determined to speak with you, but you had already left, and then I spent the next 3 days trying to compose the perfect speech that would convince you to give me a chance, even though I deserved nothing from you after my behaviour. Vivian felt as though her heart might burst. The speech you were practicing just now. Yes. Though I had not intended for you to witness that particular humiliation. His expression turned rueful. I am making rather a mess of this. No, Vivian said softly. You are doing perfectly. Something like hope flickered in his eyes. Am I? I am not engaged to Lord Ashcombe, she said, deciding that honesty was the only path forward. I never was. In fact, the entire courtship was. She hesitated, then plunged ahead. It was a scheme. To make you jealous. William stared at her. What? I wanted you to notice me. After 3 years of dropping hints and trying to catch your attention and watching you flirt with every other woman in London, I decided to take matters into my own hands. So when Nathaniel showed interest, I encouraged it, to see if you would react. A startled laugh burst from William. You manipulative little... He stopped himself, but his eyes were dancing now. You were playing a game. Yes. And it worked spectacularly. Yes. I was absolutely beside myself with jealousy. Lord Winters said I was embarrassingly transparent and pathetic. You were rather obvious, Vivian admitted, unable to suppress her smile. William shook his head, his own smile breaking through. We are both absolute fools, are we not? Perhaps, but at least we are fools together. He reached for her hand, the one not holding the flowers, and Vivian let him take it, propriety be damned. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. Lady Vivian Sinclair, he said, his voice low and serious despite the lingering amusement in his eyes. I am asking you, here and now, with all the sincerity in my heart, may I court you properly? No games, no schemes, just honest and genuine attention from a man who has been hopelessly in love with you for longer than he cares to admit. Vivian's breath caught. You love me. Desperately. Completely. Rather inconveniently, given how much time I have wasted. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at once. Yes, you may court me, William Hawthorne. Though I should warn you, I am hopelessly in love with you as well, and I have been for at least 3 years. 3 years? He looked stunned. And you never said anything? Neither did you. Touché. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made her knees weak. "Then let us make a pact. No more games, no more pretending, no more wasted time. Just us being honest with each other from this moment forward." "Agreed," Vivian said. From their position near the east lawn, Eleanor and Mrs. Davies were undoubtedly watching this entire exchange with great satisfaction, but Vivian found she did not care. All that mattered was the man standing before her, holding her hand as though it were something precious, looking at her as though she hung the moon and stars. "There is one thing I am curious about," William said after a moment. "Yes? Lord Ashcombe. Is he terribly heartbroken?" Vivian laughed. "Not even slightly. It turns out he was using me to spend time with my household companion, Miss Hartwell. They are quite in love, apparently." William's eyebrows shot up. "So we were both schemes within schemes?" "It would appear so." "Good heavens, the gossips are going to have a field day with this." "Let them," Vivian said recklessly. "I find I no longer care what anyone thinks." William's smile turned devastating. "My darling Vivian, I believe we are going to get along splendidly." And there, in the middle of Hyde Park on a perfect autumn afternoon, with Mrs. Davies and Eleanor as willing witnesses and half of London society potentially watching, William Hawthorne, Duke of Meridale, began his proper courtship of Lady Vivian Sinclair. It was, Vivian thought, about damn time, though of course she kept that particular sentiment to herself. If Vivian had thought William's pursuit during her courtship with Nathaniel was intense, it was nothing compared to his attentions once he had been given explicit permission to court her. The man was relentless. Flowers arrived at Everley House every morning, always her favourites, always accompanied by notes written in his elegant hand that ranged from witty to devastatingly romantic. He called at precisely the appropriate times, bringing small gifts, a first edition of Byron's poetry when he learned she admired it, a silk shawl in a shade that matched her eyes, a painted fan depicting the Yorkshire countryside where she had spent summers as a child. He escorted her to every social event on the calendar, dancing with her as often as propriety allowed, and spending the rest of his time standing near her, making her laugh with his dry observations about their fellow guests. "You are spoiling me terribly," Vivian told him one afternoon as they strolled through the gardens at Everley House, Mrs. Davies maintaining her usual discreet distance. "I am merely making up for lost time," William replied, his arm warm and solid beneath her hand. 3 years' worth of courtship compressed into a few weeks. "I rather think I am showing admirable restraint." "Restraint," Vivian laughed. "You sent 3 bouquets yesterday alone. The first was for the morning, the second for the afternoon, and the third for the evening. Different times require different flowers. It is simple logic. It is simple madness. Perhaps." His brown eyes were warm as he looked at her. "But it is madness I am rather enjoying." Vivian felt heat rise in her cheeks. Even after 2 weeks of official courtship, William's open admiration still made her heart race. Gone was the careful distance he had always maintained before. Now he looked at her as though she were the only woman in the world, and it was intoxicating. "My father wishes to speak with you," she said, trying to sound casual. William stopped walking, his expression growing serious. "Does he?" "Yes. He has asked you to call tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock for tea." There was a brief pause, and then a slow smile spread across William's face. "Vivian Sinclair, is your father about to interrogate my intentions toward his daughter?" "Almost certainly." "Excellent." William resumed walking, looking far too pleased with himself. "I have been preparing for this conversation for weeks." "Have you?" Vivian asked, amused. "And what exactly have you prepared?" "A detailed account of my financial situation, my estates, my family history, and a very convincing argument for why he should entrust his beloved only daughter to my care." He paused. "I may have practiced it with Lord Winters, who laughed at me, but I am fairly confident in my material." Vivian could not help but smile at the image of the intimidating Duke of Meridale nervously rehearsing a speech for her father. "I am sure you will be magnificent." "I hope so. I'm rather invested in the outcome." The next afternoon, Vivian found herself far too nervous to do anything productive. She attempted embroidery and stabbed her finger 3 times. She tried reading and realized she had read the same page 4 times without absorbing a single word. Finally, she gave up and paced the drawing room, waiting. William arrived at precisely 3 o'clock, looking impeccable in his afternoon attire. He bowed over Vivian's hand with his usual grace, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders. "Lady Vivian, you look lovely as always." "Thank you, you look terrified." "I am not terrified," he said with dignity. "I am merely focused. Your cravat is slightly crooked." William's hand flew to his neck. "Is it?" "No," Vivian said, smiling. "But you believed me, which proves you are terrified." He gave her a look of mock severity. "You are enjoying this far too much." "I am enjoying it exactly the right amount." Before William could respond, the door opened and her father entered. The Earl of Everley was a distinguished man in his early 50s, with silver-threaded hair and shrewd grey eyes that missed very little. "Your Grace," he said, offering his hand. "Thank you for coming. Lord Everley, the pleasure is mine." Vivian watched as the two men shook hands, sizing each other up in that way men did. Then her father turned to her. "Vivian, my dear, why don't you go help your mother with the menu for next week's dinner party? Papa, I am perfectly capable of—" "Now, please." It was said gently but firmly, and Vivian recognized dismissal when she heard it. She shot William an encouraging look and departed, though she stationed herself just outside the door where she could hear at least some of the conversation. Mrs. Davies found her there 5 minutes later and raised an eyebrow. "Eavesdropping, my dear." "Merely monitoring the situation." "Of course." Mrs. Davies settled beside her. "What have you heard?" "They have been discussing crop yields on the Merridale estates for the past 3 minutes. It is excruciatingly boring." "Patience, child." Sure enough, a moment later, her father's voice took on a different tone. "Now then, Your Grace, let us speak plainly. You wish to marry my daughter?" "I do, my lord." "Why?" There was a pause. When William spoke again, his voice was quiet but clear. "Because she is the most extraordinary person I have ever met. She is intelligent, witty, kind, and brave. She challenges me, makes me laugh, makes me want to be a better man. I have wasted 3 years being a fool, and I do not intend to waste another moment. I love your daughter, Lord Everley, and if you will grant me permission, I would like to spend the rest of my life proving to her that she made the right choice in accepting my courtship." Vivian pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes stinging with tears. Her father was silent for a long moment, then, "Those are pretty words, Your Grace, but I have known you since you were a boy, and I know your reputation. You have broken more hearts in London than most men manage in a lifetime." "I have," William acknowledged, and Vivian could hear the regret in his voice. "I was careless with others' feelings, and I am ashamed of that. But I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, that I will never be careless with Vivian's heart. She is—" His voice grew thick with emotion. "She is everything to me, sir." Another pause. Then her father spoke, and there was warmth in his tone now. "I believe you, Hawthorne, and since my daughter quite clearly adores you, heaven knows why, you have my blessing to propose. But mark me, if you hurt her, duke or not, I will make your life exceedingly unpleasant." "I would expect nothing less, my lord." Vivian could not help herself. She pushed open the door and walked back into the room, startling both men. "Vivian," her father said, "were you listening at the door?" "Absolutely not," she lied without shame. "I just wanted to check that you gentlemen had everything you needed." William's eyes met hers, and the warmth in them made her breath catch. He knew exactly what she had been doing, and he did not seem to mind in the least. "We are quite well," her father said dryly. "In fact, the Duke was just leaving. I believe he has some matters to attend to." William stood, bowing to her father before turning to Vivian. "Lady Vivian, perhaps you would do me the honor of a carriage ride tomorrow afternoon. There is something I would like to discuss with you." "I would be delighted," Vivian said, her heart hammering. After William departed, her father looked at her with fond exasperation. "You were absolutely listening at the door." "Yes, Papa. What am I going to do with you?" "Wish me happy," Vivian suggested hopefully. Her father's expression softened. "Always, my dear, always." The next afternoon was bright and clear, with that particular quality of autumn light that made everything seem sharper, more vivid. Vivian dressed with particular care in a walking dress of deep burgundy, her hair arranged in loose curls that Marie insisted made her look like a heroine from a novel. William arrived with his finest carriage, and without a groom, she noticed, which was slightly improper but not scandalously so, especially given Mrs. Davies' presence. They drove to Richmond Park, where the trees were ablaze with autumn colour. William guided the horses expertly along the winding paths, making light conversation about the weather and the upcoming Hartley ball. But Vivian could sense an undercurrent of nervous energy in him. Finally, they reached a secluded grove overlooking the Thames, and William brought the horses to a stop. "Mrs. Davies," he said, turning to address her chaperone, "would you mind terribly if Lady Vivian and I took a brief walk? I promise to keep her in your sight at all times." Mrs. Davies smiled. "I suppose that would be acceptable, Your Grace. I shall remain here with the carriage." William helped Vivian down, and they walked together toward a bench situated beneath an ancient oak tree. The view was spectacular, the river winding silver below them, the city hazy in the distance, the park spread out in a carpet of red and gold. "This is beautiful," Vivian said softly. "I thought you would like it." William took both her hands in his, and she noticed they were trembling slightly. "Vivian, there is something I need to say to you." "Yes?" He took a deep breath. "When I first realized I loved you, I was terrified. I told myself it was just attraction, just interest, just anything but love. Because love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant potential pain, and I had spent my entire adult life avoiding both. William, please, let me finish. I need you to understand." His brown eyes were intense, earnest. "I watched my parents destroy each other with their indifference and resentment. I swore I would never let anyone have that kind of power over me. But what I did not understand, what I was too foolish to realize, is that love is not about power. It is about trust. It is about choosing every day to be vulnerable with someone who will treat that vulnerability as the precious gift it is." Vivian's eyes were stinging with tears. "You trust me? Completely, utterly. You could shatter me, Vivian Sinclair. You have the power to hurt me more than anyone else in the world." He smiled, and it was the most open, genuine expression she had ever seen on his face. "And somehow, that does not terrify me anymore. Because I know that you would never misuse that power." "I would not," she whispered. "I promise you, William, I would never. I know. Just as I promise you that I will spend every day of my life earning your trust, deserving your love, and thanking whatever providence brought you into my world." He released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Vivian's breath caught. "Lady Vivian Sinclair," William said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "I am asking you, before God and with all the love in my heart, will you marry me? Will you take this impossible, formally commitment-phobic duke and transform him into the husband you deserve? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you laugh, holding you when you cry, arguing with you about poetry, and loving you with every fibre of my being?" He opened the box, revealing a ring that took Vivian's breath away. The centre stone was a deep amber, the exact shade of the chrysanthemums he had brought her in the park, surrounded by small diamonds that caught the afternoon light. "I had it specially made," William said, watching her face. "The stone is citrine, which I am told represents joy and creativity. The jeweler thought I was mad for not choosing a diamond, but I wanted something that reminded me of you, of that day in the park when you agreed to let me court you, of autumn, which is when I finally found my courage." Vivian realized she was crying in earnest now, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect," she managed. "You are perfect, and yes, William Hawthorne, yes, I will marry you." The relief and joy that flooded William's expression was worth every tear she had shed, every sleepless night she had spent wondering if he would ever see her, every moment of doubt and uncertainty. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, of course, and then he did something that surprised her. He pulled her close, right there in the open, where Mrs. Davies and anyone else who happened by might see, and kissed her. It was not a chaste, proper kiss. It was deep and passionate and full of 3 years' worth of suppressed longing. Vivian's hands came up to grip his coat, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her love and relief and joy into that single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, William rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you so much. It terrifies me." "Good," Vivian said, laughing through her tears, "because I love you just as much, and misery loves company." He laughed at that, a genuine, joyful sound that made her heart soar. Then he kissed her again, more gently this time, and Vivian thought she might actually expire from happiness. From the carriage, Mrs. Davies smiled and discreetly looked away, giving them their moment. The engagement was announced the following week, and if anyone was surprised by the match, they kept it to themselves. The general consensus seemed to be that the Duke of Meridale had finally come to his senses, and that Lady Vivian was a very fortunate woman. Vivian, for her part, thought William was the fortunate one, though she graciously accepted all congratulations. The wedding was set for December, which gave them just over 2 months to prepare. Vivian's mother threw herself into the planning with enthusiastic determination, and Everleigh House became a constant flurry of activity involving dressmakers, florists, caterers, and seemingly endless lists. Through it all, William remained a constant presence. He called every day, sometimes twice a day, finding excuses to see her even when there was no particular need. He attended tedious meetings with the wedding planner, offered opinions on flower arrangements, with no actual knowledge of flowers but great confidence nonetheless, and generally made himself indispensable. "You do not need to be here for the discussion of napkin colors," Vivian told him one afternoon as they sat in her mother's drawing room, surrounded by fabric samples. "On the contrary, I have very strong feelings about napkin colors," William said seriously. "That ivory is clearly superior to this cream. The undertones are completely different." Vivian's mother looked delighted. "Finally, someone who understands. Lord Everleigh insists they are identical." "Men of taste know the difference, Lady Everleigh." After her mother departed to consult with the housekeeper, Vivian turned to William with raised eyebrows. "You cannot tell the difference between those napkins." "Not even slightly," he admitted cheerfully. "But your mother was so pleased when I agreed with her, and I'm attempting to establish myself as the ideal son-in-law." "You are ridiculous." "Yes, but I am your ridiculous, which makes it acceptable." Vivian could not argue with that logic. One afternoon, about 3 weeks before the wedding, Vivian found herself at Meridale House for tea. William had invited her to see his, soon-to-be their, home, and she was curious to see where she would be living. The house was magnificent, a sprawling Georgian mansion in Mayfair with elegant proportions and beautiful gardens. William gave her a tour, pointing out various features and rooms, but Vivian could see he was leading her somewhere specific. Finally, they reached a set of double doors on the second floor. William paused, his hand on the handle, looking suddenly uncertain. "These are the Duchess's chambers," he said quietly. "They have been closed since my mother's death 20 years ago. My father could not bear to enter them, and after he died, I could not bring myself to change anything. They are exactly as she left them." Vivian squeezed his hand. "You do not have to show me if it is too difficult." "No, I want to." He opened the doors, revealing a suite of rooms decorated in shades of blue and cream. Dust covers draped the furniture, and the air had that particular stillness of a space long abandoned. "I want you to know about my mother, about who she was before my father's indifference broke her spirit." They walked through the rooms together, as William told her about his mother, Caroline Hawthorne, who had loved music and poetry, who had taught him to read before he was 4, who had filled the house with laughter before the joy slowly drained away under the weight of her husband's coldness. "She loved this room," William said, stopping before a large window overlooking the gardens. "She would sit here for hours, reading or embroidering. After she died, my father had the room sealed. He said it was out of respect for her memory, but I always thought it was guilt. He knew he had made her miserable, and he could not face the evidence of what he had destroyed." "William," Vivian said softly, moving to stand before him, "you are not your father." "I know. At least, I know it now." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "But for so long I was terrified I would repeat his mistakes, that I would trap some poor woman in a loveless marriage and watch the light slowly die in her eyes the way it did in my mother's." "That will never happen," Vivian said fiercely. "We love each other, William. We chose this." "We did." He kissed her forehead gently. "I want to redecorate these rooms. Make them yours, not my mother's ghost. Fill them with light and color and joy. Will you help me?" "Of course." Vivian looked around the space, already envisioning possibilities. I think pale yellow, perhaps, like sunshine. And we should open those curtains. Let the light in. Your mother would want that, I think. She would want these rooms to be happy again." William's arms came around her, holding her close. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "At least 3 times, Vivian said, smiling against his chest, "but I do not think I shall ever tire of hearing it." "Good, because I intend to say it rather frequently for the next 50 or 60 years. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms in the dusty, forgotten rooms, and Vivian felt hope blooming, not just for themselves, but for the healing these old wounds needed, for the joy that would fill this house once William was no longer haunted by his parents' failures. They would be different. They would be happy. She was certain of it. The morning of December 15th dawned cold and bright, frost painting delicate patterns on the windows of Everleigh House. Vivian woke early, her stomach aflutter with nerves and excitement. Today was her wedding day. Marie burst into the room at 8 o'clock, followed by Eleanor and Vivian's mother, all of them talking at once about schedules and preparations and the 1,000 tiny details that apparently required attention before noon. "The flowers have arrived and they are perfect," her mother announced, looking slightly flushed but happy. "The chrysanthemums are exactly the shade you wanted, and the ribbons match your dress beautifully." "The guests are already gathering at the church," Eleanor added, perching on the edge of the bed. "Goodness, Vivian, half of London must be attending. I saw at least 4 duchesses arrive already, and Lady Ashford's carriage got stuck in the queue." Vivian laughed, some of her nervousness easing. "William will be beside himself. He hates crowds." "William will be besotted the moment he sees you," her mother corrected. "Now come, we must begin. Marie, the bath is ready." The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Vivian was bathed, perfumed, and dressed with meticulous care. Her wedding gown was ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the bodice and hem, the sleeves fitted to her arms, and the skirt falling in elegant folds. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, which suited her perfectly. Marie arranged her hair in an elaborate style, weaving in tiny winter roses and securing her veil with the Everleigh family tiara, a delicate circlet of diamonds and pearls that had belonged to her grandmother. "You look like a princess," Eleanor breathed when they were finally done. Vivian looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress, the hair, the jewelry, it all combined to create someone who looked far more sophisticated and elegant than she felt. But her eyes were bright with joy, and the smile on her face was genuine. That was what mattered. "I am getting married," she said wonderingly, "to William, to the most stubborn, wonderful, infuriating man in England." "Who loves you desperately," Eleanor reminded her. "Do not forget that part." "I shall not." Her father knocked on the door at precisely 11:30. When he entered and saw her, his eyes grew suspiciously bright. "My beautiful daughter," he said gruffly. "When did you grow up?" "Oh, Papa." Vivian embraced him carefully, mindful of her dress and veil. "Do not make me cry before we even reach the church." "Cannot promise that," he said, but he smiled as he offered her his arm. "Come then. Your duke awaits." The carriage ride to St. George's was short, but seemed to take forever. Vivian's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bouquet of autumn chrysanthemums and winter roses. Her father covered her hands with one of his own, offering silent support. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted, "but in a good way. That is how I felt on my wedding day. The best decision I ever made, marrying your mother." He paused. "I think you are making a good decision too. Hawthorne is a good man, and more importantly, he is the right man for you." "I know," Vivian said softly. "I've always known. I just had to convince him of it." Her father chuckled. "Indeed." St. George's was packed with guests, exactly as Eleanor had predicted. The church was decorated with garlands of evergreen and chrysanthemums, their warm gold contrasting beautifully with the winter greenery. Candles blazed throughout the space, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. Vivian waited in the vestibule while the ceremony music began. Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Eleanor made last-minute adjustments to her veil, while her mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. And then the processional began, and her father was guiding her down the aisle, and nothing else mattered because William was there. He stood at the altar in formal attire, his black coat perfectly tailored, his cravat arranged with his usual mathematical precision. His black hair was slightly disheveled, as though he had run his hand through it repeatedly, and his brown eyes were fixed on her with an expression of such love and wonder that her breath caught. Lord Winters stood beside him as best man, smiling broadly, but Vivian barely noticed anyone else. The church could have been empty or filled with thousands. It made no difference. There was only William, watching her walk toward him with love written plainly on his face. When she reached the altar, and her father placed her hand in William's, she felt the slight tremor in his fingers. He was nervous too, she realized. This powerful, confident duke was nervous about marrying her. The vicar began the ceremony, his voice resonating through the church. Vivian heard the words as though from a great distance. All her focus was on William's hands holding hers, on his eyes locked with hers, on the moment when they would be bound together forever. "Do you, William Marcus Hawthorne, Duke of Meridale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the vicar intoned. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do," William said, his voice clear and strong. "With all my heart, I do." "And do you, Vivian Elizabeth Sinclair, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Vivian said, smiling through happy tears. "Absolutely and forever I do." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that William had insisted on, saying he wanted to wear a visible symbol of his devotion. And then the vicar was pronouncing them husband and wife, and William was lifting her veil with trembling hands and kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart swell. The church erupted in applause and cheers. Vivian laughed against William's lips, and he smiled as he pulled back, his eyes dancing. "Hello, wife," he murmured. "Hello, husband," she replied. They walked back down the aisle together, hands clasped, both grinning like absolute fools. Vivian caught glimpses of familiar faces, Eleanor weeping openly, her mother and Mrs. Davies both dabbing at their eyes, her father looking proud and emotional. Even Nathaniel Ashcombe was there, seated beside a blushing Grace Hartwell, both of them smiling warmly. The wedding breakfast at Everleigh House was a magnificent affair. The ballroom had been transformed with winter flowers and hundreds of candles, and the feast was extraordinary. Vivian barely tasted any of it, too caught up in the joy of the occasion and the constant press of well-wishers offering congratulations. William remained at her side throughout, his hand finding hers at every opportunity, his attention never wavering from her, even as he made polite conversation with various guests. "You are being very attentive," she teased during a brief moment of relative privacy. "I am simply ensuring my investment," he replied with mock seriousness. "I went through considerable effort to win you. I am not about to let you escape now." "Escape? We are married, William. I cannot escape." "Precisely my plan all along. I am very cunning." She laughed, and he stole a kiss. Propriety be damned. Lord Winters proposed the first toast, his speech full of affectionate jokes about William's transformation from confirmed bachelor to besotted husband. "I have known Meridale for 20 years, he concluded, raising his glass, "and I have never seen him as happy as he has been these past months. Lady Vivian, I beg your pardon, Your Grace, you have accomplished what we all thought impossible. You have made this impossible man understand what truly matters. To the Duke and Duchess of Meridale." "To the Duke and Duchess," the guests echoed, and Vivian felt tears prick her eyes again. As the afternoon wore into evening, the celebration continued. There was dancing. William claimed Vivian for the first waltz, holding her so close that Eleanor teasingly called it scandalous, and more food and toasts and laughter. Finally, as the winter sun began to set, William leaned close and whispered, "Would you think me terribly rude if I suggested we escape our own wedding breakfast?" Vivian glanced around at the still crowded ballroom. "Where would we go?" "Home," he said simply. "Our home. I want to begin our life together, Vivian. Just the two of us." She felt warmth spread through her chest. "Yes," she said. "Let us go home." They made their excuses to her parents, who smiled knowingly and offered no objections. Then, with the help of Eleanor and Lord Winters creating a distraction, they slipped away to the waiting carriage. As they drove toward Meridale House through the twilit streets of London, William pulled Vivian close against his side. "Happy?" he asked. Deliriously, she replied. Though I confess I am a bit nervous about what comes next. As am I, he admitted, but we shall figure it out together. That is rather the point of marriage, I think. Meredale House glowed with welcoming light as they approached. The staff had lined up to greet them, offering congratulations and well wishes. Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, presented Vivian with the keys to the house with great ceremony. Welcome home, Your Grace, she said warmly. Thank you, Vivian replied, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the title. She was a duchess now, the Duchess of Meredale. It still seemed unreal. William dismissed the staff for the evening, giving them permission to celebrate below stairs. Then he turned to Vivian with a slightly mischievous expression. Come with me. I have something to show you. He led her upstairs to the rooms that had once been his mother's, the Duchess's chambers. But when he opened the doors, Vivian gasped. The space had been completely transformed. Gone were the dust covers and musty air. The walls had been painted a soft, sunny yellow, exactly as she had suggested. New curtains in cream silk framed the windows, and elegant furniture in honey-colored wood filled the space. Fresh flowers bloomed in vases throughout the rooms, and a fire crackled welcomingly in the hearth. William, she breathed, when did you— I have been working on it since the day you first saw these rooms, he said. I wanted them to be ready for you, for us, a new beginning in a space that had known too much sorrow. Vivian walked through the transformed chambers, touching the beautiful fabrics, admiring the thoughtful details. Everything was perfect, warm and welcoming, and full of light. There is one more thing, William said, guiding her to a small writing desk by the window. A leather-bound book rested on its surface. Open it. Vivian opened the book and found it full of William's handwriting, pages and pages of it. She read the first entry, dated 3 years prior. I saw Lady Vivian Sinclair at the Pemberton ball tonight. She wore green, which brought out the gold in her eyes. We discussed Byron's poetry, and she challenged my interpretation with such intelligence and wit that I found myself utterly captivated. I told myself it was merely intellectual admiration. I am beginning to suspect I was lying to myself even then. You kept a journal about me, Vivian asked, her voice thick with emotion. For 3 years, William confirmed. Every encounter, every conversation, every moment I spent convincing myself I was not falling in love with you. I thought perhaps someday I might give it to you, so you would know that even when I was being an absolute fool, some part of me always knew you were special. Vivian turned to find him watching her with such tenderness that her heart ached. I love you, she said simply. So very much. And I love you. He crossed the room and took her hands. I promise you, Vivian, I will spend every day of our life together making you happy. You have given me the greatest gift, your love, your trust, your life. I do not take that lightly. I know, she said, and I promise the same to you. We shall build something beautiful together, William. Something full of joy and love and laughter. Nothing like what your parents had, something entirely our own. Yes, he agreed, pulling her close. Something entirely our own. He kissed her then, properly this time, without the constraints of propriety or watching crowds. It was deep and passionate and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Welcome home, Your Grace, William murmured against her lips. Welcome home, Vivian replied, smiling. My love. 2 years later, the gardens at Meredale House blazed with autumn colour, the chrysanthemums Vivian had planted the previous spring, creating a spectacular display of golds and russets. She stood among them, smiling as she watched her husband attempt to teach their 8-month-old son the proper way to examine a flower. You see, Thomas, William was saying with great seriousness to the baby in his arms, one must appreciate the subtle gradations of colour. This petal, for instance, has at least 3 distinct shades. Thomas responded by grabbing the flower and attempting to stuff it in his mouth. No, that is not— Vivian, help me, he is trying to eat the garden. Vivian laughed and rescued both the flower and her husband. Perhaps botanical education can wait until he is old enough to not try consuming everything he touches. A sensible suggestion, William conceded, shifting Thomas to his hip. The baby, who had inherited his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes, reached up to grab William's cravat with delighted gurgles. You are extraordinarily patient with him, Vivian observed, moving close to press a kiss to William's cheek. It is very attractive. Is it? William's eyes warmed. I shall endeavour to be patient more often then. You are patient with me constantly. That is different. You do not try to eat flowers, only because they taste terrible. I experimented as a child. William laughed, the sound full and genuine. Vivian never tired of hearing it. The serious, guarded man she had fallen in love with had transformed into someone lighter, happier, more openly affectionate. Fatherhood suited him remarkably well. Eleanor and Lord Winters are coming to dinner tonight, Vivian reminded him, with their daughter. Excellent. Little Catherine and Thomas can have their first proper playdate. Though at 8 months and 6 months I suspect playing will consist largely of them staring at each other and drooling. Probably, Vivian agreed, smiling. Eleanor had married Lord Winters 6 months after Vivian's own wedding, in what everyone agreed was the most romantic courtship of the season. Their daughter Catherine had been born in June, and the two couples had become inseparable, their children growing up together. I also received a letter from Nathaniel this morning, Vivian added. He and Grace are expecting. How wonderful. When? Next spring. They sound absolutely thrilled. William shook his head wonderingly. Who would have thought that your scheme to make me jealous would result in 2 happy marriages and soon to be 3 children? I am an excellent schemer, Vivian said smugly. You are a menace, William corrected, but he was smiling. He shifted Thomas to one arm so he could pull Vivian close with the other. My magnificent, clever, beautiful menace. Sweet talker. Only for you. Thomas chose that moment to grab a fistful of Vivian's hair, yanking with surprising strength for such a small person. She yelped, and William quickly disentangled the baby's fingers while trying not to laugh. Parenthood is very glamorous, Vivian said dryly, smoothing her disheveled hair. Indeed, just as I always imagined. They stood together in the garden, their son between them, surrounded by the flowers Vivian had planted to mark their new beginning. The afternoon sun was warm despite the autumn chill, and from somewhere nearby came the sound of birdsong. Are you happy? William asked softly, the question he posed often as though still slightly amazed by their life together. Vivian looked at him, at this man who had been so afraid of love, who had wasted 3 years keeping her at arm's length before finally surrendering to what he felt, at their son, already showing signs of his father's stubbornness and his mother's curiosity, at the home they had built together full of warmth and laughter and joy. Happier than I ever dreamed possible, she said honestly. You? More than I deserve, William replied. But I am learning to accept good fortune when it finds me. Good, because I have no intention of letting you forget how fortunate you are. I would expect nothing less. Thomas began to fuss, making the particular sound that meant he was tired and hungry and generally done with outdoor activities. William and Vivian exchanged a knowing look and began heading back toward the house, their steps naturally matching. Do you remember, William said as they walked, that day in Hyde Park when I was rehearsing what to say to you? You mean when Eleanor and I caught you talking to yourself like a madman? I prefer to call it practicing important oratory, but yes, I was so nervous I could barely form coherent thoughts. You were very sweet and very transparent. I was terrified you would reject me. Vivian stopped walking and turned to face him. William Hawthorne, I loved you for 3 years before you ever worked up the courage to court me properly. There was never any chance I would reject you. I know that now, he said, but at the time I had convinced myself I had wasted all my opportunities, that I had left it too late. I thought you might accept Nathaniel's proposal just to spite me. I considered it, Vivian admitted, for about half a second. Then I remembered I was hopelessly in love with you, and spite seemed like a poor foundation for marriage. Wise woman. Indeed. They reached the house, and William passed Thomas to his nurse for feeding and a nap. Then he turned to Vivian with the mischievous expression she had come to know very well. We have approximately 2 hours before our son wakes and before our guests arrive, he said. Whatever shall we do with such abundant free time? I can think of several possibilities, Vivian replied, matching his tone, though most of them involve significantly less clothing than we are currently wearing. Scandalous. William took her hand, leading her toward the stairs. I am shocked and appalled at your suggestion. No, you are not. No, I am not, he agreed, grinning. I am, in fact, entirely in favor of this plan. They climbed the stairs together. laughing like newlyweds despite 2 years of marriage, and later, wrapped in each other's arms in the sunny yellow rooms that had once known only sorrow, Vivian reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. A scheme born of frustration, a courtship built on jealousy, a love that had always existed but took years to acknowledge, and through it all the simple truth that some people were meant to find each other, no matter how long it took or how many obstacles stood in their way. "I love you," William murmured against her hair. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the tomorrows we have left." "I love you too," Vivian replied, snuggling closer. "My impossible duke." "Your impossible duke," he agreed. "Now and always." Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the gardens, carrying the scent of chrysanthemums. Those flowers that had become their symbol, marking the day everything changed. The day jealousy gave way to honesty, and games gave way to genuine devotion. And in the house that had once been cold and empty, laughter rang out, the sound of a family built on love and trust, and the simple joy of being together. It was, Vivian thought as sleep began to claim her, the perfect ending to their story, or rather, the perfect beginning to the rest of their lives. The end. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this beautiful story. We truly hope it warmed your heart and reminded you that love, no matter how delayed or complicated, always finds a way. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your heartfelt support keeps us motivated to tell more stories full of romance, healing, and emotional redemption. And don't forget, at the end of this video, another story from our channel will appear. Click and be swept away by more unforgettable moments. Thank you for being here.